Hey guys, my name's Mo Timbo. I'm 34 years old and this is my testimony. So I grew up in Southeast London. From a young age I was raised in the Southeast area near Peckham, a place that we used to know as Woolly Road. And back then, you know, Woolly Road was a crazy area, lots of crime, lots of violence. And so this is my testimony of how I survived or how I worked through living in Southeast London. So, you know, from a young age, one of the things that I noticed at the age of 12 was that around me was a lot of drug dealers. In the area that I used to live in, a lot of drug dealers, a lot of criminals. And there was always something inside of me at the age of 12 that would be fascinated about these men, you know, because there was something inside of me that wanted to be like these men. And so I remember every day I used to come back from school, I used to go home, and the first thing I'd do is I would look outside the window and I'd see like all these grown men with nice chains on. You know, back then it was like these thick white gold chains, bracelets, watches, cars. And I remember I used to look at this at the age of 12, and in my mind, this was a picture of masculinity. This is what it meant to be a man. You know, to be a man, you had to have the nice chain, the nice car, the nice girls. And so from a young age, this was like my example of masculinity, and it was my desire. And so it moved from being a desire to being something that I intentionally started driving after. And so at the age of 12 years old, I started hanging around with the wrong crowd. And one thing you have to understand about me is that, you know, in primary school, I was a good child. I wouldn't say I was a bad child. I didn't really want to get involved in crime or arguing. I was in the top set for most of my lessons. I was in the top for my education. I was doing really, really well. But when I went to secondary school, that's when everything changed. Because the secondary school I went to was between two rival gangs. So in London, South London, as many of you know, in the early 2000s, it was a lot of tension or beef between the Peckham boys and the Brixton boys. And so the school that I went to, because I lived in Wharf Road, I was technically classed as being with the Peckham boys. And so around me, I just used to see all this fighting, all these gangs. And so I got sucked in. And not only did I get sucked in, I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to be part of these gangs because I used to see the excitement, the reputation that they had, and I wanted this reputation. And so what started happening is I started hanging around with some friends from the age of 13, and these friends, they started smoking cannabis. And so I thought to myself, you know, in order to be with them, I have to do what they do. And so I started smoking cannabis, and I remember, you know, I didn't even like the smell of cannabis. I didn't like the taste of it. But I started smoking cannabis because I wanted to fit in with this crowd. And what started happening is the more and more I started hanging around with these people, the more and more I started hanging around with these friends, because, you know, I know a lot of people call it a gang, but we didn't call it a gang. We were just friends. And so the more and more I kept hanging around with these friends at the age of 13, I started to talk like them, I started to walk like them, I started to dress like them, and then I started to behave like them. And one of the things that started to happen is that I started noticing that they were making money. And the way my friends were making money was from selling cannabis. And so I remember the age 15 was the first time I thought, you know, I'm gonna start making money for myself, because right now I'm just smoking weed, but I'm not really making any money. And so what I started doing is, I started selling cannabis. I remember the first day somebody gave me an ounce of weed. I think back then it was like £120. They gave it to me on what we call consignment. So, you know, you take the ounce of weed and then you go and sell it. And so I took the ounce of weed, I got some scales, I weighed it up, I put it in a bag, and I had like 20 bags and I was ready to go and sell them. But what nobody told me is that you're supposed to sell them, you're not supposed to smoke them. And so I ended up smoking all the bags. Nobody really came to me. And so because of that, I got in trouble with the guy that gave me the ounce of weed. And so his way of fixing it was giving me more weed to sell. And so I realized that, okay, now I'm in debt to this person, I need to start making money. And so I started selling weed, and I started being really focused as a weed seller, trying to find clients, trying to find ways of selling weed. And so I started making some money from selling weed. And so because of that, my status started growing a little bit, because before that I was always hanging around with the guys, but I wasn't like the baddest boy on the block. You know, there were guys way more gangster than me. I was just kind of affiliated with them. And so by the age of 15 now, as I started making money from selling weed, I started getting more and more involved with my friends. And as I started getting more and more involved with my friends, I started getting involved in gang rivalry. Because one of the things that happens in Southeast London is that once you start making money, it starts off as just money, but it moves from making money to now being involved in gang fighting, gang rivalry. And so what happened is, you know, we started fighting with the local gangs, fighting with different people every day. We used to have beef. We used to travel on the bus 12 from South London, go to West End, and we used to rob mobile phones of people. I remember the first day I did my first robbery. I was 15 years old. We jumped on a bus. There was a young guy there. He had a phone, old phone back then. It was the 3310. And I remember I robbed his phone. And it was weird because although I didn't want to rob him, there was such an adrenaline rush from this life of crime. I felt alive. I felt like a man. And so I started chasing that feeling more and more. And so whenever my friends were involved in a fight, I'd get involved in a fight. And because of this desire for masculinity, this desire to be a man, I ended up getting involved in some serious crime. And so at the age of 15, one of my friends was having a fight with some guys in the local area. And so again, me, I crave this masculinity. I crave this adrenaline rush of being involved in a fight. And so I remember I went down to the fight. I took some knives with me. I took two. I gave one to my friend and I took one as well. And so we went to the guys that he had beef with. And so out of adrenaline, I ran up to these guys. I pulled out the knife. And as I pulled out the knife, one of the guys pulled out a gun and he aimed the gun directly at me. You know, I'm only a teenager, 15 years old. He aims the gun at me. I've got a knife. I'm thinking, what am I gonna do with a knife versus a gun? And so he shoots the gun. But as he shoots it, he's aiming at me, but he shoots it and I hear the bang. And so I thought I got shot. But it turned out that he never shot me. He shot my friend that was next to me. And so my best friend got shot in the stomach. The rest of the guys, they ran away. And as they ran away, my friend dropped to the floor. And so I picked up my friend and I started to run with him. You know, we're only 15 years old at this time. And so I started to run with him. He was one of my closest friends. And as he's running, the bullets moving around in his stomach, and he was severely in a lot of pain. And today, that best friend of mine is no longer alive. He's lost his life, he was shot, and he's no longer surviving. And so for me, that situation taught me a lesson. It taught me a lesson in my mind, but not a lesson in reality. It taught me a lesson that this life that you're living is more than just a game. You know, when I first began, it was a game, it was exciting. You know, we're going together as a group of guys, you know, 100 of us riding on a bike, going to rob a phone, having jokes, you know, cussing each other. But then that day when my friend got shot, the reality hit me. And the reality hit me that this is not a game. That this lifestyle is gonna either take me out or it's gonna put me in jail. And so I had to make a decision, what do I wanna do? And instead of leaving the street life, I decided that I need to be even worse. I need to become more of a gangster, because before that time, I was flirting with the idea of being a gangster. You know, I was doing well at school and then I was hanging around with my friends, smoking weed. But from that moment, everything shifted in my mind. I said, this is not who I'm gonna be anymore. And so I started becoming a little bit more aggressive. I started carrying a knife on me all the time. I used to carry a long kitchen knife on me, used to tuck that in. And just in my mind, this is what it meant to be a true man. So I remember there was one day, me and my friend were walking in a place called Camberwell, and we saw a guy, and he was from like a rival gang. And so we saw him, and so we moved to him, we went up to him, I took out my knife, showed it to him, and we robbed him of his phone. And so we took his phone off him and we went our way. A few days later, I was in my area, I was in my estate, and I was just chilling. And as I was chilling, I realized that there were 5 boys walking into my estate with balaclavas on. And I recognized one of them, he's the guy whose phone we robbed a few days before. Now he's with all of his friends and I'm on my own. So they come up to me, they've covered their face with the mask on. One of them's punched me in the face and I've tried to run. But as I run, I end up running down a dead end. And so I'm in this dead end and these 5 boys start running towards me with balaclavas on. One of them pulls out a big kitchen knife and he begins to go behind me and he begins to stab me in my arm. he begins to stab me 3 times in my arm. And so as I realized that he's stabbing me, the other 4 are running towards me. So as the 4 are running towards me, I run through them. And as I run through the 4, one of them picks up an even bigger kitchen knife and he stabs me straight in my back. And when he stabbed me, I could literally feel the knife go into my back. And so I fell to the floor, he pulled the knife out of my back and they ran off. And so they took me to the hospital. Some of the local neighbors, they took me to the hospital, and the doctor said that last stab was inches away from my spine. They said I shouldn't even be alive, that I should be dead. And again, it was another moment in my life where I thought, this is not a game. I nearly lost my life. They stabbed me 4 times, but I carried on living this life because in my mind, now I'm in too deep. Now I'm in this life. There's no way I can get out. If I get out, it's going to be worse for me. And so I said to myself, I'm going to have to be all in. And so because of that, I started realizing that cannabis wasn't making me enough money. Most of my friends now were selling crack cocaine and heroin. And so at the age of 16, I decided that I'm going to start selling crack cocaine and heroin. And so I started working for one of the local drug dealers in the area. I started selling crack cocaine and heroin for him, going to meet the crack addicts. And I remember looking at these crack addicts. And even though I was a drug dealer, there was something in me that felt pain for them, felt compassion for them, because they were just like normal people, but they were addicted to the drugs that I was selling them. The heroin, the crack cocaine. I remember seeing crack addicts that were parents coming with their children to buy crack, coming to buy heroin. And so I started selling drugs for this person. And then eventually I realized that, okay, I don't need to just sell drugs for someone. Maybe I can sell drugs for myself. And so I moved out into a different area. Back then we used to call it going to country. You know, in the early 2000s, we went to country. I went to near Essex and I was selling crack cocaine and heroin for myself. I built up like a drug business. We used to call it billing up a line. And so I built up a line, and that line was making nearly £4,000 to £5,000 a week for me. And then I was able to get like one of the younger guys from the area to start selling for me, or some of the crack addicts to start selling for me. And so from the age of 16 to 18, my life was basically defined by selling crack cocaine and heroin. I was making thousands of pounds a week. I'd buy a BMW, I'd buy chains, I'd go to the clubs, trying to live that life, because in my mind, this is what it meant to be a man. This is what it meant to be a true man. This is what it meant to be, you know, a gangster. This is the reputation. And so little by little, my reputation started growing around my area. My friends, their reputation started growing a little bit because we're making money now. But also we bought a gun. I remember I bought my first gun, was a .38 revolver at the age of 17. And so now, you know, we're on the streets, we're doing crimes, and we're involved in gang fights. And at the age of 19, I was selling some crack cocaine and heroin. I went down south, and as I was selling this crack cocaine and heroin, I sold some drugs, but I didn't sell it to a crack addict. I sold it to an undercover police officer. And so what had happened is the undercover police officer, they grabbed me, they checked me, and they found thousands of pounds worth of crack cocaine and heroin on me. And they took me to the cell, and they told me that I was going to get a long time in prison. And so as I was in the prison, I was 19 years old, I was sat inside the prison, and they're telling me I'm looking at 5 to 10 years in jail. And so I'm looking at my life, I'm thinking, what have I done? You know, I've been on the streets, I didn't really want to be on the streets. This wasn't the life I chose. This is just something I aspired to, and somehow it got out of hand. And so as I was in the cell, I looked up in the ceiling, and there was a sign that said, "Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired?" And at that moment, I said in my heart, I said, I'm tired of this life. You know, I'm 19 years old, I've been stabbed multiple times. By that time, I've been stabbed 6 times. By the age of 19, I've lost my best friend. I've been shot at 2 times, people tried to shoot me. I've been raided by the police on numerous occasions. And I just looked at my life. I was addicted to weed, selling crack cocaine and heroin. And I looked at my life thinking, this isn't what my life is supposed to be. I have good parents, I've come from a good home. This isn't what I should be doing. But I said, I want to change. But like many people on the streets, I said, how do you change? I don't know how to change. And so right there, I was in the prison cell. And at that time, I was dating a girl. You know, I'd moved up north. We had an attempted murder charge for the guys that stabbed me. And so I moved up north. And as I was up north, I met this girl and she used to kind of tell me about Christ. So when I'm in the prison cell, I prayed and I said, Jesus, if you're real like this girl's telling me, that, you know, my girlfriend's telling me, if you are real like this, I pray, get me out of this police station and I'll give my life to you forever. You know, I don't want to go to prison. You know, they weren't giving me bail. They were going to remand me. They had the papers. And I prayed. And when I prayed in that police cell, the police opened the door and they said, you are free to go on bail. And I remember that day clearly, like it was yesterday. They said, you're free to go on bail. And so I left the police station and the first person I rang was my girlfriend. I told her, hey, listen, we need to go to church now. And she says, what happened? What happened? We've been trying to ring you. Your phone's off. I told them I got arrested. I was about to get sent to jail, but God helped me, so I need to go to church today. She said, there's no church today. It's Friday. I said, okay, cool. We need to go whenever there's a church. And so on Sunday, she took me to a church. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. Just before I went into the church, I rolled up a spliff, some weed. I smoked some weed before I went to the church. And, you know, the last thing you should ever do is go to a church high. It was a Pentecostal church. People are singing, praising. I've never seen nothing like it in my life. But as I was sat in the church, I sat down and I heard the preacher beginning to preach. And when the preacher was preaching, he said, it doesn't matter what your life has been like, Jesus can help you. He said, it doesn't matter what your life has been like, Jesus can save you. He said, it doesn't matter if you just come out of prison, if you've been involved in gangs, Jesus can save you. And I remember sitting there and it was like he was preaching in a room filled with people, but it was like it was only for me. I remember I looked at my girlfriend, I said, you're a snitch. You told him I was coming, didn't you? And she said, I didn't tell him anything. And he said, if you are here and you want to give your life to Jesus, raise your hand. And that day I repented. I gave my life to Jesus Christ at the age of 19. And I felt different. I've never felt anything like this. The adrenaline rush that I had from gangs, what I felt that day was deeper than that. The drugs that I've smoked, what I felt that day was better than that. The clubs that I'd been to, the champagnes that we bought, the cars, all these different things that I'd been involved in. What I felt that day in prayer, giving my heart to Christ, was something I'd never felt. And I made a decision that day. I said, I'm going to give my life to Christ forever. And so I started going to the church. I left London. I left my life. I left my friends, the old friends. I said, I'm going to be a new man. And if I'm going to be a new man, I need new friends. And so I was very radical with that. I left my friends behind and I started to serve Jesus Christ. And so for 9 months, I was in this church. I was learning how to pray. I was learning how to be a disciple. My life was different. I stopped smoking weed, stopped clubbing, stopped drinking. I said, this is my new life. When I was living for the devil, I was 100% in. Now I'm for God, I'm 100% in. But what happened is, after 9 months of serving God, the police came back. And they came back because of the crime that I did. And so I had to go to court. And whilst I was in court, I showed the judge how much I changed through the last few months. And unfortunately, the judge said, you still have to go to prison. And so I was sentenced to, I think it was 12 years in total concurrent, but we had to serve 3 years. And so whilst I was in the prison, during that time, I said to God, I'm still going to live for you as a Christian inside a prison. Because whilst I was in prison, there were all these other gang members that were there, but they never knew Jesus. Now, I knew Jesus because I'd just been in church. And so I made up my mind that whilst I'm in prison, I'm going to evangelize to all the prisoners. I'm going to tell them about Jesus. You know, I'm not the gang member anymore. I'm in prison, but I'm a Christian. And so I started telling everybody in the wing about Jesus. By the time I left that prison, over 600 men had given their life to Jesus inside the prison. We even had a baptism. It was so powerful. All these different prisoners were getting saved. We used to have prayer meetings inside my cell, inside my prison cell. People used to come for prayer. I used to preach inside of the prison. We baptized people in the prison. And it was so powerful. And that day I realized that God can use me. That it doesn't matter about my past. It doesn't matter about my struggles. That the same God that saved me is the same God that can use me. And so I came out of prison. And I remember when I came out of prison, 1 month after coming out of prison, I got married to my girlfriend, and we got married. You know, I got married and I was still on tag because I just came out of prison, so I had the tag around my ankle. I wanted to live for God. I wanted to live righteous. I wanted to live holy. And so we got married. We started attending the church. We became the youth leaders in the church. And all of a sudden, my life changed. I've gone from being on the streets, stabbings, shootings, robberies, drug dealing, to now being in the church, married with a wonderful wife. And so by the grace of God, you know, with that wife, we had 2 children now. I had a son called Jonathan, and I've got a wonderful daughter called Victoria. And then at the age of 26, I was sent out to become a pastor in the north of England. You know, God helped us to build a church in England to really try and preach the gospel. And because I believe that the same God that saved me can save anyone. And so I started to preach that message. And in England, we had a revival of all these different young people, many young people getting saved, baptized, giving their life to Christ. We planted churches from there. And then a few years ago, God gave me a passion. He told me that he wanted to send me to Europe, to Paris. And so I said, you know, God, if it's your will, let it be done. And then I started watching videos in Paris about the gang members, all the different people in Paris that are involved in the same life that I was living in London. Because in London, we didn't know that people in Paris were living the same way. And so I really believe that God put this on my heart. And so now me, my wife, and my children were in Paris to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it's just mind-blowing, because when I think back to where I used to be, how my life used to be, and where I am today, it completely blows my mind. It hasn't been easy. You know, there's been lots of times of ups and downs as a Christian. There are times where you fall as a Christian. There's times where you make mistakes as a Christian. There's times where you don't always do the right thing as a Christian. But one thing has never changed, and that's the desire and the passion to live for Jesus, to make Jesus' name known in all the earth. And so now, today, I look back and I just thank God. I thank him for setting me free from crime. I thank him for setting me free from drugs. And I want to say, if there's anybody watching this testimony and you feel like you're currently in this life, you feel like you're trapped in the system, you're trapped in the cycle, maybe it's drug addiction, maybe it's gang warfare, maybe it's depression, whatever you feel that your life is currently being choked by, whatever you feel that you are in bondage by, I want to give you the good news that the same Jesus Christ that saved me, the same Jesus Christ that delivered me, is the same Jesus Christ that can deliver you. You just have to accept him into your heart as Lord and Savior, and no matter what your life has been like, he can transform it. Today, I no longer have bitterness. I've learned how to forgive people. I used to have a lot of bitterness. There's no longer this anger. There's a joy. There's a peace about me. I'm no longer paranoid, always scared about the police or scared about people. There's a freedom to my life now. And that's what Jesus Christ can do. So I pray that this testimony will bless you. And I pray that you open your heart to the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.